So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into our first session of the morning on managing your body-worn camera policy and implementation program grant. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to David Lewis at BJA. David?
Thank you, Carrie. What we're going to go over these next few slides in this presentation are some of the things that it's really been guided by questions that we get from the field, how we're dealing with our grantees. Next slide, please. As Carrie mentioned, my name is David Lewis. I'm a senior policy advisor here at the Bureau of Justice Assistance. I've actually been in this position for 16 years, and I am a retired police officer out of the state of Pennsylvania. So I have a very specific desire and like for this particular program. Although this type of technology was in very infant stages prior to my retirement, but it's so exciting to see where it's gone today. At this time, I'd like to just have Roldo Velasquez introduce himself briefly, and then we'll get started. Roldo?
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. As you can see, my name is Gerardo Velasquez, and I'm the State Policy Advisor for Puerto Rico, and also I'm the co-lead for the body-worn camera program. I've been in BJA for 20 years, and before that, I worked for the U.S. House of Representatives for 9 years. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Roldo. Next slide, please. We're looking at kind of the overview slide here, things that we're talking about. We're talking about the purpose, the team, purpose and goals, grant adjustment notifications, and requesting reimbursement. Next slide, please. One of the things that that's very important when we talked about these type of programs is the procurement process. And one of the things that we get a lot of questions on is what's the proper procurement procedures. One of the things that we tell you, there are some guidelines that are from federal, especially people that are on some of the lists as approved vendors. But you have to make sure that to ensure, since this is a grant process and that you're getting federal funds, that you follow all the proper procedures when you're putting out there for procurement. Now, one of the things that that you have to look at is make sure that it's very open, that it's it's free competition, that you're not letting certain companies out, especially when you're making the guidelines so restrictive that only maybe one or two may be able to do that. So it's important that when you're doing these kind of things, that you make sure that it's a very general, open information, especially when we'll talk a little bit about requests for proposals. Now, the other thing that you have to look at when you're doing procurement is what kind of guidelines that you're required to follow. Now, there are many times there may be local, maybe you're from a city, a county, or some unique special type of agency. For example, we've had universities come in and schools for some, so their procurement guidelines may be a little bit different than what we see for a local government or county or even a state agency. So it's very important that you're well aware of the guidelines that you're required. Now, we've had something unique happen over this last couple of years, especially in dealing with procurement of body-worn cameras, is that some organizations, state organization or maybe a regional organization, has done a larger procurement for a region and allowing other people to sign on to that particular procurement. What you have to do is when you're coming into us and saying that you're going to sign on with another procurement contract, that particular procurement contract meets the guidelines for your city, county, or state. We even have situations where people have signed on to another procurement contract it might be from another state. So all those things are important. The other thing that we'll ask you to do, because it's our requirements to document everything that we do to make sure that all the federal funds are being spent properly, it's important that you have the ability to provide that documentation to us. In other words, let's say, depending on your request for proposal, your procurement process, but also what we may do, and this is from Darius, Cicero, and Yolanda, and Geraldo that you'll talk to get additional information in a bit, our programs folks, that they may ask you for this additional information. Documentation when utilizing federal funds is extremely important. The last bullet point that I have on this particular slide is the timeline. And a lot of times this can be an issue. It has to do with initially that you may have put out a procurement, you may have chosen a company, and then something may have happened. Maybe that company was bought out by another vendor, or some other thing happened. We've also had issuance where administration has changed within that government entity, so they had to go backwards and look at this again. The one thing that we wanted to make very clear to you, that the timeline when this occurred does not affect any of the compliance issues. That timeline is something you have to work through. Now, I will tell you that the awards that are presented by BJA are for a 36-month period. So you have to be able to purchase, implement, and have all this done in 36 months. We do have some flexibility to do some extensions, but we would assume and would like to see the purchase of the equipment and the procurement process completed in that first 12 months, and then be working on the policies. Next slide. So one of the things, the purpose and goals of BJA of our team is to help you successfully navigate through this administration of your program, of the grant terms and everything. So we have a list here of the goals. So, as we go through these things, the items that are of extreme importance is when you get that finally acceptance, and then the budget approvals. You also will have in these, before you can get your access to your funding, there are special conditions on the grant. To have policies and policies in place is a requirement and special condition, and does not allow you to have access to 90% of your funds until that policy is approved. So those are the things that are important when following the guidelines and knowing the rules to be a successful grantee. So one of the big things that we're here to do is, how do we help you? How do we answer your questions in a timely manner so you can be successful in the acquisition, deployment, and implementation of your particular program. Next slide, please. Now, I want to just go over this real quick. The team that you'll be dealing with as a grantee, or if you are a future grantee with us, I already introduced myself, David Lewis. The division chief out of the programs department is Darius Cicero. You met Geraldo already, and Elaine Boston are the two state policy advisors that actually are doing that work for you in making sure that if you have questions, if you have adjustments to your grant, any of those kind of things. And they are extremely knowledgeable in this program. They're extremely helpful. But I will tell you, because even though we're working from a policy and program standpoint, we work very closely together, and we are pretty much in lockstep, working also with our TA provider, CNA, to make sure that we are as helpful to you as possible. So I'll turn it on over to Geraldo for the next slide.
Okay, BJA primary responsibilities. The state policy advisor is the first line of direct communication with grantees and is responsible for reviewing and approving grantee reports and grant adjustment notifications and process grant closeouts. The state policy advisor will address all questions regarding programmatic, financial, and administrative elements of your grant. The state policy advisor will also communicate about the release of all special conditions, including the special conditions related to the body-worn camera policy requirements. Next slide, please. The body-worn camera training and technical assistance is provided by the TTA provider, CNA. It pairs site with TTA lead and analysts, and it provides the TTA resources and support from subject matter experts to help with program implementation. Body-worn camera TTA website, request for support website, and TTA available to both grantee and non-grantee agencies. Next slide, please. Purpose and goals of the TTA. Purpose, to provide TTA resources so that the PIP sites have the best possible chance of successful completion of their projects. Goals, to ensure that each agency and subgrantee has an established body-worn camera policy in place before deployment of the BJA-funded body-worn cameras. Establish positive, helpful working relationships with the PIP sites and the TTA team through regular but non-intrusive contact through TTA teams and PIP sites, and also provide structure and opportunities for PIP sites to learn from one another's experience, peer-to-peer learning through grantee meetings and with TTA services such as webinars, workshops, and peer visits. Next page, please. This slide provides you with the reporting periods and contact information for your federal financial reports that go through GMS, your semi-annual progress reports that also go through GMS, and your PMT that goes that you do at the different the BJA PMT OJP.gov site. Next page, please. Progress report and federal financial report due dates are fixed and cannot be adjusted. Late reports submitted after the period into GMS will automatically result in a withholding of funds placed on the award, which will be removed once the progress report or federal financial report is submitted. Next page, please. This is a process for submitting the performance measurement tool, or the PMT. Performance measures and data are collected through a PMT form, which is a PDF questionnaire. You then export your PMT report to a PDF file that you submit your PDF file document under the progress report section in GMS. Next page, please. Award special conditions. Standard special conditions are applicable to all body-worn camera PIP grantees, such as completion of OJP financial management and grant administration training. This training is required for all point of contacts, alternate point of contacts, and financial point of contacts, and it must be completed 120 days after the date of the recipient's acceptance of the award. If for some reason you don't complete it after 120 days, a freeze can be added to your award. Additionally, body-worn camera policy scorecard approval. 90% of funds are held until it has been established that the grantee has established a body-worn camera policy that meets the requirements for policy development. Next slide, please. Programmatic special conditions. Special conditions that can result in withholding of funds include budget pending review and approval, missing documentation from the application package, such as your disclosure of pending applications, your affirmation of regular reviews of body-worn camera digital footage to enhance officer safety. Next slide, please. Clearing your body-worn camera policy special condition. You need to work with your TTA lead and CNA team to complete the body-worn camera PIP policy review scorecard or chief executive certification. CNA will inform TTA lead of completion and TTA team approval. Your policy review scorecard will be approved by BJA after being recommended for approval by CNA. Your state policy advisor at BJA will clear the programmatic special condition related to the body-worn camera policy. Next page, please. Grant Adjustment Notices, or GANs. Although you likely submitted a timeline and budget plan with your grant application, BJA recognizes that even the best man plans sometimes need to be adjusted. Grant Adjustment Notices, or GANs, allow grantees to make changes through various types of GANs. GANs must be submitted when the grantee has a change in project scope, a change in budget, and additional time required for the grant, and changes in grant contacts. Next slide, please. GANs. In the event that your agency needs to submit a GAN, please contact your BJA state policy advisor directly for any questions. Your state policy advisor will work with you on the particulars of your GAN request, such as contact BJA state policy advisor directly about any GAN request. And if you discuss a GAN with your CNA, TTA, legal team, do not expect that information to be relayed directly to your state policy advisor. So contact us directly, please. Next page, please. GAN process at a glance. Examples of programmatic changes to the award include grantee point of contact, budget modification, project period extension, change of scope, and a sole source request. GANs require multiple levels of approval and should include necessary supporting documentation. BJA may send back a GAN for any necessary changes or for additional information that is needed as part of the review process. BJA may deny the GAN if it does not meet the criteria for a GAN submission. For additional resources for assistance in submitting a GAN, you can go to the Grants Management System online training tool. There is a link below. Next slide, please. Budget review and approval. All grantees must have a BJA approved budget before any expenses can be obligated. For grantees who have not yet received a final budget clearance due to a conditional clearance withholding special condition, please contact your state policy advisor directly for any questions on the budget clearance process. Note that conditional clearance withholding special condition is added to discretionary awards that did not receive a final budget approval during the application review process. All costs must be allowable as noted on the body-worn camera program requirements. And an important reminder is that storage expenses are not allowable under the federal portion of the award. However, this is an allowable expenditure under the matching portion and must be reported on the annual progress reports and quarterly financial reports. Next slide, please. Your matching requirement. All awards require a minimum of 100% match, or dollar for dollar, one-to-one match. This may be cash or in kind. Matching funds may be used only for the purpose that would be allowable for the federal funds. Ensure that all supporting documentation is maintained and for the expenditures incurred under both the matching and federal portions. Important reminder, when considering personnel hours as part of your body-worn camera project, please ensure that local funds are not supplanted by federal funds. Next page, please. To request for reimbursement, you need to go to the Grant Payment Request Systems, GPRS, at the link provided. But as a reminder, we will have a new grants and management system starting in October 2020. To close out your grant, a grantee can close out a grant prior to the end date of the project period if all project activities have concluded, performance measures have been completed, funds have been reimbursed, all special conditions cleared, including the online grants and financial management training for the point of contact, and the financial point of contact. Closeout activities for BJA and TTA providers. Final programmatic and financial status reports. You need to submit a closeout package. BJA closeout survey with your TTA provider. Closeout call with the TTA team. And the body worn camera TTA exit survey. Next page, please. And here is a list of helpful resources for your use. If you have any additional questions, just feel free to either email me or call me or send the chat right now. Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Roldo. I just wanted to kind of point out a couple of things here. For majority of our attendees this year are from our FY19, 2019 program. Roldo made mention of match storage as an allowed match cost. That was changed in our FY 2020 awards. That is actually no longer allowed. There is a bit of a caveat if it's done as a software service, as a package, non-itemized. But if anybody needs that to be more clearly specified, I would say come out and you can talk to myself on that, because this was a change. And this was not something that BJA wanted to continue to do the way we did it from 2015 to 2019, but from our Office of General Counsel, based on the guidelines that we got from Congress on how these funds are to be spent, that is what constituted the change. So I want to make that very clear, because I said a majority of you are FY19 grantees. Those that may have applied in FY 2020, we're hoping to have the awards, the people that got awards in 2020 have that announced soon. But that's just something that you have to think about if you're an agency that's thinking about starting a program. That's just something that you may want to take into consideration. I also got a clarification. I saw it come up here that BJA stated that they would like to see procurement happen in that first 12 months. The point that was made that it's very difficult, or that you have your funds that are held that 90% until your policy has been accepted. They brought it to my attention that we're trying to say after the award is made, they like that policy to come in for approval within 180 days. Sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't. But there's still the possibility, and this is a discussion that's been had, that you can still put requests for proposals out there, those kind of items, to find out how you're going to spend that money and so forth. So there's a lot of caveats to that. I wish I could say it's 100% clear, but I will tell you right now is it's one of the things that, as we offer as part of our training and technical assistance, to identify peer agencies that may be of similar size, maybe of same parts of the area, maybe a state, that you can work with them to see how they did things. So we always say in federal government, don't reinvent the wheel, but it seems like that's all we ever do. So the last thing I wanted to mention just briefly, and then we can open it for questions and answers, is talking about matching. We get a lot of questions about what can I use for my matching, and this could be anything. It could be staff time, it could be training, it could be additional equipment, those type of things. But as Geraldo had mentioned, you have to be very, very cautious in the match that you're not supplanting. In other words, I already had this allocated in my budget to do, but I'm going to use it as matching. You can use that as matching. I'm not saying you can't, because it's in your budget, but you can't use federal funds, where I'm talking about supplanting. You can't use federal funds to pay for those things that were already in your budget. You can use it for a match if it's in your budget.
Great, thank you, David and Gerardo. We do have a
There's a couple of questions there that I can answer one of them.
Okay, go ahead.
How do we confirm that our final budget clearance is completed? Send an email to your state policy advisor or call them and they can let you know if your budget has been approved yet.
Great, thank you. So the question was, how do we confirm that our budget is cleared to go and that they've met that requirement? So yeah, please just reach out to your state policy advisor and they'll be able to tell you all that information. So the next question is, if we have completed our project prior to the end of the program grant period, are we required to continue to report zeros on our subsequent financial reports, or would we just be able to mark the last quarter that we submit as the final?
You can submit the last quarter as a final and submit a final programmatic report also.
Great, thank you. And then we had another question about if you could just reiterate what you said was not allowed under the purchasing for the federal funds. So this is just, I don't think the attendee quite heard about the requirements for storage and storage under match versus storage under the federal funds.
Okay, under FY19, storage is permissible as a match, but is not permissible with federal funds. The other thing with federal funds is you can't make any purchase of an item that you may already have in your budget. That would be called supplanting. So for example, that you were going to buy 60 cameras and you want to use some of the federal funds for somebody to manage the program, you could do that, the person to manage the program, under your matching funds, because that was probably, it's in your budget. You could use that for federal funding because you already had it in your budget. So that's, and we can guide you to what the idea behind supplanting is, but that's basically it. You can't use federal funds for something that already exists in your budget.
Perfect, thank you, David. So we have one more question asking for a little bit of clarification on the timeline of policy review and approval and then the release of funds. So specifically, how much of the funding is withheld until the policy approval, and what's the timeline recommendation for getting the policy approved? Oh, you're on mute, Gerardo.
Sorry, it's 90% of the funds.
Okay, so that's 90% of the funds are withheld until you get your policy approved by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And at that point, the remaining can be released pending as long as you don't have other special conditions remaining, right?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. And we do recommend that. I think there may be a 180-day requirement, but it's a little flexible, but certainly within the first year, we recommend working with you to get your policies approved. I think we used to be a little more tight on the 180 days, but with everything going on with COVID and people needing to work offsite, we've seen policies take a little bit longer this year. But certainly we're trying to get through all of them within the first year. Okay, I have another question. Can I close out my grant even though the grant doesn't end until 2021, so long as all the activity is cleared and closed? So I think this is just kind of reiterating the question from earlier about, can I close out my grant early if everything has been met?
Yeah, that's simply, and Geraldo, I'm sure, mentioned this before, that you would just simply do your closeout and then, you know, it would be done. The one thing that I will add on the grants, that sometimes what we've found is individuals have changed. We talked about change in government or change, that they may not want to purchase as many cameras, so they may not be using all the federal funds, but the match requirement that they put in is a requirement to match the amount of funds you're getting from the Fed. So even if you're not going to spend that amount of money, you have to file the appropriate paperwork to actually change what your match would be. It won't allow you to do any of the other reports until all those numbers are in sync. Is that correct, Ubaldo?
This is correct.
Okay, I think that is all the questions. Does anyone have any additional questions? Please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, seeing one more. Is there a dollar or percent threshold for requirement of completing a budget grant adjustment notification? Or if anything changes, do they need to submit again? Nope.
You're on mute, Ubaldo.
I would recommend that the grantee submits again for any changes, so that way it can have well, they can have history of what was approved and what was not. Because remember, you can always get audited on your grant award.
Thank you. And yes,
I would also add, if it's a budget adjustment, if you're changing, and I've mentioned this before, changing the number of cameras that you may purchase, changing where they may be distributed, these are deliverables in the grant. And if for some reason there was an OIG audit, that you would want to make sure that what you finally do with your program is what you stated that you were going to do. We've had some departments that say originally we were going to give it to these field officers, but we've had, for an example, a sheriff's department say, no, we're going to split it for street deputies and then other ones that are in our correctional facility. So that kind of documentation is extremely important that you have in your grant.
yes, very good. And we certainly have that happen fairly often, so it is not an uncommon situation, especially as, most agencies will develop their budgets, either prior to selecting a vendor or prior to getting a final contract negotiation with the vendor, and prices change over time, and maybe who you thought you might want to go with is not who you decide for your RFP process if you actually procure. So we certainly, that does happen and it is fairly common. So always, reach out to your state policy advisors with that type of information.
This is our contact information. I just wanted to let everybody know if you have questions, just reach out to any one of us. Probably email would be the best, but if we need to set up a call, we can also do that.
And also, my colleague Elaine Faustine covers all the Mighty One camera grants from A through K. From A through I, I'm sorry, and I covered K through Z for the states.
Yep, and it's in your attendee guide if you're not sure which state policy advisor is assigned to your site for the 2019 sites. If you're a 2018 or previous site, please feel free to reach out to the TTA team if you're unaware of who your state policy advisor is, but hopefully you're all aware of that at this point. Okay, I am not seeing any other questions come in, so we can go ahead and close this session. Thank you, David Lewis and Gerardo Velasquez, for all the information on managing our body-worn camera PIP grants.